Hello and welcome to the 27th episode of the Commander Quest podcast. Today we are going to be talking about a Pramikon pump opponent's creatures / give opponent's creatures deck and a Yuriko ninja deck. If you do not already know, the Commander Quest is my goal in building all of these decks. I am trying to build decks with all of the cards in Magic that are legal in Commander. I'm making Commander decks with no overlap. So let's get into it. So to start off, we have Magic news. So other than spoilers for Core Set 2021, there is really only one thing I could find, which is arguably also spoilers, but I'm just gonna touch on it really quickly. So, for the Planeswalker decks, they revealed the Planeswalkers that are going to head it and some other cards that will go with it. So there's Basri, Devoted Paladin, there is Teferi, Timeless Voyager, there is Liliana, Death Mage, and there is Chandra, Flames Catalyst. There's also Garruk, Savage Herald. I will get more into these cards when I do the set review, but for now, those are the heads of the decks. You can look into it yourself. I will put a link in the description of this article and of spoilers for the new set. After recording this, there was an update to the Commander rules that I think is important enough for me to edit this in. Commander dies triggers officially work. They have changed the rules, so it is now not a replacement effect anymore. Okay, I will put a link in the description, but Commander Dies triggers now work. This is gonna bring a lot of changes to the format. Not really. Honestly, it'll just help a couple of older commanders. Yeah. So that was just recently announced, and it is a huge change. I don't think it's going to actually impact the format that much. It will only affect select few decks. So, next thing I want to cover really quickly before we get into analyzing Rakdos Charm is, so I have recorded a bonus episode, which I do basically whenever I want, whenever I have time. And because this is scheduled, this will come out before it. So if I say what number episode wrong, or if I know this is going to happen, my predictions for what the cards in Core Set 2021 are going to be from Maro's hints have already been released. The cards have already been released. Then that is why. I usually try to record and then release my podcast really quickly so that I can have as up-to-date information as possible. But because this is scheduled, I can't do that as well. So I will be releasing that as soon as possible, and I will begin working on my set review as soon as all of the spoilers have been released. So, let's get into analyzing Rakdos Charm. So, Rakdos Charm, if you do not know, is basically, it's a part of a cycle of charms. So there's one for a lot of different colors. I'm not sure if it's just there's a cycle of 5 of them or if there's a cycle of 10 of them, but Rakdos Charm is black, red for an instant. Choose one. exile all cards from target player's graveyard, destroy target artifact, and each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So this is similar to the other charms because they all cost the 2 colors that they are. And they all have choose one of 3 options. So for Rakdos charm, here's what basically I'm analyzing the aspect of each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So for that I'll get into real quick, but for the other abilities, to be able to exile all cards from target player's graveyard, that is rather useful. There's going to be a lot of situations that can help you, and being able to destroy target artifact will also be able to help you in a lot of different situations. Each creature dealing 1 damage to its controller is rather good, actually. As you will see, the more you go forward in turns, the more that it'll be likely to do. So I just put down what damage it's most likely going to be dealing to all of your opponent's total, because putting down how much damage it's probably going to deal to you isn't necessarily helpful. So, starting off on turn 2. It is likely to deal 2 to 3 damage to each opponent total. Now, this seems bad, and honestly it is. You might even also be taking damage if you played a 1-drop. On turn 3, it is likely to be doing 3 to 5 damage. Also, pretty bad. Turn 4, 6 to 8 damage. Now, this is the point where it gets pretty good. It starts being a decent card. You might consider running this in a deck if it were just black-red, deal 7 damage to divide it as you choose among opponents. Now, I don't know what deck that would go in. Maybe a Rakdos, well, of course Rakdos, but a lot of Rakdos decks care about damaging your opponents. Maybe something like that. But for that, probably 6 to 8 damage. Turn 5, 7 to 9 damage. And turn 6, 8 to 10 damage. Once you get up to those big numbers, you're doing a lot of damage. You're having a very large impact on the board because people just have so many creatures. So, beyond that, the odds go up, but not as drastically, because the only thing going up is the number of cards people can draw, not necessarily very much the number of creatures that they can, the CMC of creatures that they can cast. So, Rakdos Charm, overall, if you think about all of these categories, they're all good in a specific scenario. Exile cards from target player's graveyard, that is a very common scenario. Graveyard decks are very common. Destroy target artifacts, there are a huge number of problematic artifacts. And each creature deals 1 damage to its controller can either be decent value, or it can be a huge blowout to a token deck, which are also very common. This is just lots of different options that seem a little bit obscure, but overall you will almost always be able to get good value from this. Just don't play it in a token deck, because it does deal damage to you. If you have a lot of creatures, it will deal damage to your own creatures. So, beyond that, it is time to get into the decks. So I'm going to start with this Pramikon Pump Opponent's Creatures deck. So Pramikon Sky Rampart is blue, red, white for a 1/5 flying defender. When it enters the battlefield, choose left or right. Each player may attack only the nearest opponent in the chosen direction and planeswalkers controlled by that opponent. Now, I was considering saving this for a Super Friends deck, but there are a lot of different things I can do with planeswalkers, and they are not really in need. So this is a deck that I have been thinking about and trying to make work, especially with the Commander Quest, for actually probably a month or two now. I have tried building this deck 3 separate times, and I have now finally succeeded. So the idea of this deck is to take advantage of cards that give your opponent's creatures or pump your opponent's creatures as a downside. They're so powerful that they need that. Now, while I did say they are so powerful, they usually actually are not. They're usually just a big creature. So, what you can do is with Pramikon, you can give it to an opponent that is not going to be able to attack you. And then, once that opponent has gone around the table, you're going to want to choose someone with an aggro deck and killed all the rest of the players. You have tons and tons of cards that are just going to let you reflect damage. You have a lot of counter spells in order to get you to that point. You have some draw. There's just a lot of support for this game plan, and it works surprisingly well. So, to cover it again, first we're going to play down Pramikon. Then we're going to give that aggro player who's hopefully on either side of us and not in the middle. By that I mean like before us or after us in turn order, not 2 turns after us. And we're going to wait for them to eliminate all the other players. Then we can help them by giving them tons of creatures. We can also use counter spells to counter things that will stop them, or just things that will stop us, or just things that player is playing that could damage us, things like that. And we can make it so they kill everyone, right? And it's down to you. How are you going to stop them from killing you, and how are you going to kill them? So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but mostly the best way to do it is with damage reflection. We are choosing a creature aggro deck for a reason, and we are helping them do that. So if we reflect all the damage in one lethal kill, then they could also very likely die. Plus, it is a great way to delay it. There are also a lot of different cards that just deal a big chunk of damage, such as Acidic Soil, which is a sorcery for 2 and a red. It deals 1 damage to each player for each land he or she controls. Now, you will probably have a decent amount of lands, but you don't have any ramp. And you are the one that is able to control combat with Pramikon. You have set it up in a way that you're almost never going to take damage. You are just making that opponent go much, much lower. So, for examples, in the different categories of cards, we have the Hunted cycle for giving opponents creatures. One example of that would be Hunted Dragon, 3 and a red for 6/6 flying haste. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 3 2/2 white knight creature tokens with first strike. Whew, it is really, really hot in here. I'm recording in a closet, and I put tons of foam on the wall to improve sound quality, and it's like at least 3 trillion degrees in here. It is now summer, and I haven't installed the ACs yet, so it's working on it. It's very hot, but hopefully in the future it will not be this bad. Okay, so once we have given our opponent's creatures, we can also use, for support, we can use draw. We have divination, we have foresee, we have coastal discovery. Those are basically just a couple mana sorceries to draw 2 cards. Foresee lets you also scry for 3 or 4 mana, depending on the one. And then we have some counterspell support. We have Arcane Deny, which is 1 in a blue, counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. We have Blue Elemental Blast, which is blue for an instant. Choose 1 counter target red spell or destroy target red permanent. This can actually be surprisingly useful because the aggro deck is very likely to be red. So, since the deck that is staying around longest is likely to be red, we can do a lot to inhibit them with this spell. Bone to Ash, 2 blue, counter target creature spell, draw a card. So once we have controlled the board and we've given them lots of creatures, an example of pumping their creatures could be Tempt with Glory, 5 and a white for sorcery, tempting offer, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Each opponent may put a +1/+1 counter on each creature he or she controls. For each opponent who does, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. The counters on creatures I control isn't really gonna do much. So once you have that, you are going to want to reflect damage. One example of this is Boros Fury Shield, which is 2 and a white for an instant. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by target attacking or blocking creature this turn. If red was spent to play Boros Fury Shield, it deals damage to that creature's controller equals to the creature's power. That is great. Comeuppance is pretty sure the best version of this that I have. Prevent 3 and a white for an instant. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn from a creature by sources you don't control. If damage from a creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to that creature. If damage from a non-creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to the source's controller. This is a very easy way to wipe out your opponent's board because it's an instant, and try and kill them after that. Sadly, it does not deal damage to your opponents. I'm pretty sure the only ones that deal damage to opponents only work on one source. Okay, next is Deflecting Palm. Deflecting Palm is red-white for an instant. The next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, Deflecting Palm deals that much damage to that source's controller. So, again, it'll stop one thing, and it will make that opponent take that much damage. I don't know if you could just hear, but I was experimenting with opening the door, and it sounds a lot worse if I do, so I guess I will just be a billion degrees. That's basically all there is. This is a pretty straightforward deck, and I feel like it could work fairly well. Next up is a Ninja Tribal Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow deck. Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow, is 1 blue-black for a 1/3, with Commander Ninjutsu blue-black. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's converted mana cost. Basically, this is split into a couple of categories. First of all, we have evasive creatures. Creatures that we can bounce back. So, of the evasive creatures, we have a couple of different niches. The main one that we can take advantage of is creatures with 0 power. If a creature has 0 power, it is still considered unblocked, and our opponents are even less likely to block it. Plus, they often have evasion, such as Aven Envoy, which is blue for a 0/2 with flying. So this is a great way to take advantage of 0 power, and there are several cards in here that fit that description. So, there are also just other random creatures with evasion, usually flying, that I can return back to my hand. I have 14 cards in that category because I want to draw at least one every single game, but I don't want to have more than one. Because I can recast it over and over again, having more than one is just a waste of cards. So, 14, I know I will get one, and I have a decent chance of getting 2, but because I really want to get one, that is good enough. So, next, it is time to look at the ninjas. So I included all of the ninjas in this deck that I could. There are 18 ninjas in the game. So some of those have ninjutsu, similar to Yuriko. Return an unblocked attacker you control to hand. Put this card onto the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking. So, and they usually have a deal damage trigger. This one, Azra Smoke Shaper, is when it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. This does not fit what they usually do, but it is close enough. It is still a ninja, and it will still deal damage and trigger Yuriko. Usually we will be able to get 2, maybe even 3 triggers of Yuriko per turn. Next up is Fallen Shinobi. Fallen Shinobi is 3 blue, black for a 5/4 with ninjutsu, 2 and a black. 2 blue and a black. And it says when it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library. Until end of turn, you may play those cards without paying their mana costs. So, basically, I can get some value. Being able to play them without paying their mana costs can be very nice, but I don't have any way to control my opponent's libraries. So you get the idea of the ninjas. They just usually have ninjutsu, trigger Yuriko, and have triggers of their own. It can work very, very well. The next category is Scry. So Scry is very self-explanatory. It is just creatures with Scry attached onto them. That way I can filter my deck and get what I want on top revealed with Yuriko. This way, this is also really good with creatures, because if I can get them to be unblocked, I can bounce them back with my ninjas, with my ninjutsu. One great example of this is Augury Owl. 1 in a blue for a 1/1 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, scry 3. So, first of all, I can attack with it and it will most likely be unblocked, and I can replace that with a ninja, which will get me lots of triggers. Second of all, when I do recast it, I can scry 3. And third of all, that scry 3 can be very useful because it will control what I hit on the reveal with Yuriko. And because Yuriko wants big creatures, I have plenty more cards similar to that. I have a giant category, 19 cards of big CMC stuff. So this niche of big CMC cards is big CMC cards that you don't really need to cast. There's not really very much that makes you want to cast these cards. They just exist. So you can get the huge triggers off of Yuriko, and sure, you get them into your hand, but whatever. You're not necessarily going to cast them. You might just want to discard them or something. This is good in this deck, in this niche, because that's not necessarily the biggest use of it. That's not the reason you're using it. So there's a lot of different cards, and you get the idea. They're pretty bad. One of the worst examples is Aladdin's Lamp, which is 10 for an artifact. X, tap. Instead of drawing a card from the top of your library, draw X cards, but choose only 1 to put into your hand. Shuffle the leftover cards and put them at the bottom of your library. X cannot be 0. So, basically, you get to... I don't think I'd run this if it were free, if it were 0 mana. It's pretty bad. But some of them are better than others, such as Abundant Maw, which is 8 for 6/4, Eldrazi Leech, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. You can also use it as an emerge. You may cast this by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost, reduced by that creature's converted mana cost. So some of them are salvageable, and you might be able to get some value off of them in very niche scenarios. but really you are just trying to reveal them off of the top of your deck. Beyond that, we have lands, which we have 19 lands, 15 swamps, Castle Vantress, Soldevi Excavations, and Temple of Deceit. Those are all just lands that let me have scry on my lands. Alright, it is time to get into the collection statistics. While it is loading, I will go ahead and briefly explain. As I am working on this quest, I have statistics because I use my collection to track the cards in my decks. So I know the number of cards, the CMC distribution, the type distribution, and a lot of other data. Alright, it is loaded. So I have a total of 2,456 cards, and 2,450 unique cards. The reason for that is 7 dwarves. 7 dwarves, if you do not know, is a card that you can run 7 of, and it gets pumped for the number of cards you have out. That still annoys me. So, my estimated value is $4,000, which comes out to be, 2,450, 4,000 divided by 2,450 is 163 per card versus the overall average of 220 per card. That is not too bad, not too good. Today we got 126. We got about $200 of cards, over 120 cards. So we didn't do great today, but we also didn't do horrible. So beyond that, we have color distribution. We have 366 green, 487 red, 252 black, 406 blue, 296 white. So, as per usual, it's pretty bad. We have 461 colorless, also too much, and 188 multicolor, which is too little. So, I think I might try and do some mono black or mono white decks, because I haven't been seeing very many interesting Orzhov decks for me to build. So, in type distribution, we have 1,382 creatures, 281 sorceries, 365 artifacts. We have 17 planeswalkers, 89 lands, 232 enchantments, 5 tribal cards, and 227 instants. That is not too bad. That is a pretty good distribution. For some reason, it surprises me that I'm still fairly good on the creature count. All these decks seem to me like they have a lot of creatures, but I guess not. Alright, for the rarity distribution, we have 925 commons, 754 uncommons, 673 rares, and 104 mythics. That's about right. Again, we are ahead of the curve. The change between common, uncommon, rare, and mythic is much more drastic than it is in real life. So basically, I have more commons than I have a higher percentage of commons than there are in all of Magic than I do of rares, for example. But it isn't by as much as I would like it to be. So, again, same thing as usual. Color distribution is off, maybe be a little bit more conservative, but overall, it is pretty good. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. You can join my Discord server with the link in the description. You can go on my YouTube channel if you're not already watching from that. If you are going through a podcast, with a link in the description. You can find my personal Archidekt with the link in the description, or at I'm a Johnny, AJOHNNY, not AJNI, the Planeswalker. You can find my Commander Quest Archidekt at Commander Quest or with the link in the description. You can find my website with the link in the description. You can email me at griffindont@gmail.com. And I am working on potentially getting more socials that I can link to. But for now, that is all. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.